I just noticed it's time for me to make a video. Jesus wants me to make a video at least once a week. This past week has been focused on my writing. Uh, as you know, I was writing a book with Jesus Christ as the main character, and I decided that, well, not I decided, Jesus decided that I needed to stop this. The way he showed me was he just made me restless in my sleep. I couldn't sleep, and he was trying to get my attention. And I said, Lord, why are you not letting me sleep? What did you? And he said, Gail, remember the writing advice that I gave you back in 2014? How I said I want you to write about no distant past, no distant future, just tell the story of you and your men, and I want it to be nonfiction. And he said, you're starting to get back into that same old trap that I told you not to get into, where you're making me the main character and you're starting to speculate about things about me, which he says, I don't want you writing that stuff. I was going to write um, a nonfiction novel, and I was doing a really deep Bible study to try to determine how Jesus must feel as the heartbroken lover. And Jesus said, no, Gail, this is not what I want you to write. He didn't have to use Brent Spiner. Last time when he communicated with me, he almost caused an earthquake to happen at Church of Gail. And he said he was really upset. He hated the direction my writing was going. Fortunately, he didn't have to go to that extreme this time. He just didn't let me sleep until he got my attention. So I said, okay, God, what are you trying to tell me? He says, Gail, I don't like the direction your writing's going. Remember, you and your man. I said, well, I've already written the whole outline. Between what I was going to do was structure a novel where I was going to have a chapter in Jesus Christ's point of view, and then a chapter telling the story of my Japanese ancestors and trying to tie Jesus Christ working through my Japanese ancestors and how he was upset that true love was being denied in the world. And he said, Gail, he says, a lot of things you're doing in that book are good. He said, I do like that you're telling the story of your ancestors. And he said, that's good. That's your story, Gail, because that's you. Because you are like the reincarnation of your royal ancestors. So when you tell the story of your ancestors, you're telling your story and you're obeying me. But he says, when you start getting off into trying to talk and having scenes between me and Satan and making conversations up, he says, that's where you start going where I don't want you to go. So I have redone my outline. I've also redone my cover. Actually, when I was thinking of making Jesus Christ the main character, I redid the cover, and I still like what I did to the cover. I redrew Jesus, and I like what I've done with the cover. I'm not going to change the cover, but I did have to change some of the back cover information, stuff about me as a writer and about the book. And so I've updated the cover for the paperback. And I also spent this whole week redoing the outline. I thought, oh no. I thought, well, Jesus said, all that research you did on your Japanese ancestors is not wasted. He said, I like that. But he said, because that's you. You're telling your story. And, while I was researching this week, I it's just I actually have a sample of my first chapter. I've redone that so you can see what this book is going to be like. But I was just breaking down in tears reading about in Japan. They made a very excellent miniseries about my ancestors. Unfortunately, it's all in Japanese with no English subtitles. And I am basing a lot of the history of my ancestors from what I've learned from watching that Japanese miniseries. It's a very long miniseries. It has about 36 one-hour episodes. And right now, what I plan on doing is I plan on basically, I'm going to be writing 3 historical novels centered around my ancestors, which was the Oshu Fujiwara family, and they lived heroic lives. And the clan died out because ambitious, selfish, and cold people murdered them. and they lost their clan. And I really believe that Jesus Christ was very impressed with the hearts of my ancestors. So much so that he reincarnated them into me. And it's true that I have the genetic profile of 60% Catherine the Great and 50% King David. And Jesus has had a real challenge keeping those King David genes alive because Satan has wanted to kill them off. He's basically, Satan's been wanting to kill off the Jewish race so that Bible prophecy won't be fulfilled. And Satan hopes to steal Jesus Christ's millennial reign, which was what I was going to make my book about. But Jesus said, no, Gail, no distant past, no distant future. So I've quit that. Basically, I'm going to write 3 books now. I'm working on the first book. It's called Jesus, the Eternal Bridegroom, Robin Williams from Heaven. And in this book, I tell the story of the Abbe. What happened? I have actually quite a fascinating history as far as my ancestors go. Grand Prince Vladimir of Kiev, who was a Russian ruler around 1000 AD, when he died in 1015 AD, he had Sviatopolk and 2 other kids that were next in line or succession for the throne. Sviatopolk was not supposed to be the one to get the crown. It was supposed to be Boris or Gleb. I think it was Boris. Boris and Gleb were very devout Russian Orthodox, or I would say very devout Christians. And they gladly decided to let Sviatopolk have the throne. But Sviatopolk didn't trust the people because he wasn't popular with people. So he had Boris and Gleb murdered just to make sure they could not usurp him as the king of Russia, or the Grand Prince of Russia. They were called Grand Prince back at that time. So Vladimir the Great had a lot of concubines and wives. They say he was a handsome man, and he had a lot of lovers. So he had a lot of children. And when Boris and Gleb were murdered, many of the children of Vladimir the Great were scared for their lives that now that Sviatopolk was in power, and they ran into Siberia and decided they needed to leave Russia if they wanted to stay alive. Because even though Boris and Gleb said, yes, you can have the throne, Sviatopolk, we're not going to fight with you for it, he killed them anyway. He didn't want to take any chances. So, and these children of Boris, and so what had this, Boris and Gleb went across the Russian frontier till they came to the Japans. It took about a year. I think they were traveling on horseback, and they took their families with them. Among the people that landed in Japan was a couple, a man, a woman, and a baby boy, who became Abe no Yoritoki, the Abe leader in Japan around from about 1020 to 1040 AD. He had a wife named, and I'm naming her Sarah in my book. I don't think anybody really knows what her name was. And he had a son named Sadato. Actually, they had Russian names, and they changed their names to Japanese names. So the problem is, because they came from high royalty, they had to disguise their background. And there was a group in Japan called the Amishi who adopted them. The Amishi were a northern tribe in Japan, and according to the mainland Japanese, they were considered barbarians. But they weren't really. They just wanted to be autonomous or separate from mainland Japan. They didn't want to integrate with mainland Japan. So my story is the story about these Russian royals who ended up becoming, the Amishi were about to die off. They had just lost some major battles with mainland Japan, and mainland Japan was encroaching into the north and taking over their territory. And then things got worse when it was discovered they had gold mines in northern Japan, and that became a problem. Greed took over. Of course, and my book is all about how a man from the royal Fujiwara clan named Sunikyo fell in love with one of the Russian royals, and with Yoritoki and Sarah's daughter, who I name in my book Yu, which is also the name that she had in a in the miniseries made by her. They just assigned a name to her because nobody really knows what her name was. These Russian royals were very beautiful because Vladimir the Great was a handsome prince, so his children were good looking. And I would say the mistake that the Japanese production made when they portrayed the Abe clan was they made them look too Japanese, and they were actually quite Caucasian looking. They had dark hair and dark eyes, but they were for a Germanic tribe. And they came from the same gene pool that would later produce Catherine the Great. And that's why I ended up with 60% Catherine the Great. So my story is about the love story of Yu with Fujiwara royal, who was forced, who fell in love with the enemy, kind of like Romeo and Juliet. He was forced against his will to fight his wife's family. And because he chose love over ambition, he ended up giving his life. And my story is about their love and why he decided to choose love over obeying the general on his side. He was a very high-ranking military bureaucrat. And eventually, the lovers, there was a lot of treachery in mainland Japan and even within their own family, betrayal within their own family and other clans that shared the northern lands with them. And my story explores the hearts of all of these people, what made them do what they did, and the results of their decisions. And all I can say is when I watched the production, I just cried. My ancestors were so heroic. So I'm telling their story in a historical novel, and it's a love story, a heroic love story. It kind of has a tragic ending, and that it's kind of like a bittersweet ending because Jesus told me that all of my royal ancestors from Japan did go to heaven. And my book is about why they went to heaven and that Jesus didn't forget them. And I am the reincarnation of those Germanic royals that escaped Russia and ended up in Japan and who died and whose clan died off and they had to go into hiding. And I'm going to be writing actually a 3-book series on this, tying in the past with the present, with how the parallels between their story and what's happening to me and my men. And there are a lot of parallels. One lesson that I've learned as I'm writing this book is it's actually transforming me to just doing the research on my ancestors. I've learned that that Jesus likes it when we honor the love in our hearts and when we value vastness and greatness over greed and ambition. And what part of the price you pay when you're a light in the world is that the evil ones will lie about you, and they will ascribe motives to you that are not true. They'll say you're greedy or you're proud or you did this, and my ancestors had to go through that, especially when they were conquered and they were defeated and like fires were set to their compounds and stuff, and they were blamed for the crimes of others. And this is what's happening to my men right now. In fact, I hear that all of my men are practically bankrupt because of their clones taking over, impersonating them. I have not seen the real Brent Spiner at his Twitter in about 6 months. It's all been his clone, and just about everything online about Gerard Butler and Matthew McConaughey is their clones. It's like my men are dead, but I know they're not. I think Zach Knight is just not giving them an online presence at all, but I haven't lost my faith, and I'm inspired by my ancestors. One of my ancestors did lose her faith. My story is going to be going into the tragic results when you lose your faith and you become cynical and weak and you lose the vastness in your heart and just become commonplace. And the tragic results of when you stop believing in love.